Happy birthday, sweetie. Dr. Catherine Hayes beamed at her tablet screen, watching her daughter Sarah's face light up 600 million kilometers away. The 7-year-old was already wearing the junior scientist kit Kate had shipped to Earth months in advance. Did you like your present? Mom, I already found 3 different types of bacteria in the bathroom. Sarah held up a Petri dish proudly, her missing front tooth adding to her enthusiasm. Dad says I'm not allowed to swat any more toilets, though. Kate laughed, even as a familiar pang of guilt hit her chest. Another birthday spent on Europa, manning humanity's most advanced deep space listening post. The pay was extraordinary, and 6 months on / 6 months off wasn't the worst schedule, but moments like these made her question every career choice that had led her here. The massive arrays outside hummed constantly, scanning the depths of space for any sign of intelligent life. 15 years of operation, and all they had to show for it were some interesting quasar readings and a lot of disappointed scientists. A soft chime from her workstation interrupted Sarah's detailed description of her bacterial colonies. Kate glanced at the notification, fully expecting another routine data variance that needed authorization. Her hand froze above the keyboard. Sweetie, I need to call you back in a few minutes, okay? Something just came up at work. Sarah's face fell slightly, but she nodded bravely. Okay, Mom. But you'll call back before bedtime. Promise. Kate ended the call and pulled up the incoming data stream. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, running preliminary analyses. Hey, Martinez. She called out to her colleague down the hall. Are you seeing this? Dr. Martinez appeared in her doorway, coffee mug in hand. Seeing what? I was just about to start my break. His eyes widened as he saw her screen. What the hell is that? The signal was unlike anything in their database, a complex mathematical sequence, repeating with perfect precision every 4.3 seconds. Kate's heart raced as she began isolating the pattern. Get everyone in here, she ordered, not taking her eyes off the screen. And someone wake up Johnson in processing. I need confirmation this isn't a glitch. Within minutes, the small control room was packed with every available scientist and technician on the station. The initial excitement gave way to focused concentration as they worked to decode the signal. It's definitely artificial, Johnson confirmed, his usual skepticism absent. Whatever this is, it's not natural phenomena. Kate nodded, her throat dry. Look at the mathematical progression. It's not just repeating, it's counting down. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Humanity's first confirmed contact with an alien intelligence, and it was sending them a countdown. There's something else, Kate said, pulling up a secondary analysis. Embedded in the signal, these look like coordinates. She pulled up a global map, plotting the data points. Red dots appeared over major cities: Shanghai, New York, London, Mumbai, Lagos. My God, Martins whispered. They know exactly where we are. Kate's tablet buzzed with an incoming call. Sarah, right on schedule for bedtime. She stared at her daughter's smiling contact photo as alarms began blaring throughout the station. The countdown signal had just accelerated. Get me a direct line to UN Command, she ordered, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting around her. And someone find Ambassador Okonjo. Tell him. She paused, watching the numbers tick down faster now. Tell him first contact protocols are officially in effect, and we're already behind schedule. As her team scrambled to comply, Kate allowed herself one more glance at Sarah's photo before muting the incoming call. Whatever was coming, she had to make sure her daughter would have a future to grow up in. She turned back to her screens and began documenting everything. Humanity's first steps into a larger universe would be cautious ones. They couldn't afford any mistakes. The signal pulsed on, counting down to a moment that would change everything. Ambassador James Okonjo stood at the window of his Shanghai office, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. In 72 hours, according to every projection and the carefully crafted first contact timeline, Humanity would make history. He'd rehearsed his welcome speech 1,000 times, fine-tuned every gesture, every diplomatic nuance. His phone buzzed. A message from Dr. Hayes on Europa. URGENT. Signal acceleration. Timeline compromised. The sky rippled. There was no other way to describe it. Like a stone dropped into still water, reality itself seemed to distort. The sunset colors twisted, bent, and in their place emerged something that shouldn't exist. The alien vessel materialized above Shanghai's financial district, defying every law of physics Okonjo had learned about in his briefings. No atmospheric entry, no gradual descent. One moment empty sky, the next impossibility. Get me the president. He barked into his phone, already moving toward the secure elevator. And patch me through to the first contact response team. The ship, if you could call it that, was massive. Crystalline structures jutted out at impossible angles, seeming to fold in on themselves in ways that hurt the eyes to look at. Dark energy fields pulsed between the geometric formations, and the whole thing rotated slowly, refracting the remaining sunlight like a cosmic prism. This wasn't supposed to happen for another 3 days. General Chen's voice crackled through his earpiece as Okonjo's car sped through the rapidly gridlocking streets. We're scrambling jets, but keeping them at observation distance only. No aggressive moves, Okonjo ordered, watching the vessel through his window. Stick to Protocol Delta. Begin broadcast sequence 1. Sir, his aide interrupted, tablet in hand. They're scanning us. Every major city, simultaneously. The energy readings are off the charts. Okonjo's carefully constructed plans crumbled with each passing second. The vessel was ignoring all attempted communications, treating their carefully crafted welcome messages like background noise. 20 years of preparation, of rehearsals, of contingency plans, all useless. His phone rang again. Dr. Hayes. Catherine, talk to me. The countdown wasn't a countdown to arrival. Her voice was tight with tension. It's still going. Whatever they're here for, this isn't the main event. The car screeched to a halt outside the emergency response center. Okonjo rushed inside, finding organized chaos. Screens showed the vessel from every angle, while analysts shouted readings and observations. Sir, a young lieutenant rushed up. We're detecting similar spatial distortions over New York, London, and Moscow. More ships incoming. No. Dr. Hayes cut in through the speakers. Those are echoes. It's the same ship, existing in multiple locations simultaneously. They're breaking quantum locality. Okonjo watched as the impossible vessel continued its scan, ignoring humanity's increasingly desperate attempts at communication. Every protocol, every procedure they'd established for this moment was falling apart. New energy signature, someone shouted. There. A beam of pure white light shot from the vessel, striking the ground in the heart of Shanghai's business district. Panic erupted in the command center, but as seconds passed, it became clear this wasn't a weapon. Where the beam touched the ground, complex geometric patterns began spreading, forming an intricate mandala of light nearly a kilometer in diameter. It's a landing zone, Dr. Hayes breathed through the comm. Ambassador, I'm detecting massive quantum fluctuations. Something's coming through. Okonjo straightened his tie, a futile gesture of normalcy in the face of the impossible. How long? 30 seconds. Maybe less. Jim. She hesitated. The patterns in that mandala, they're a perfect match for the error sequences I found in the original signal. Whatever's coming through, they're not following their own rules. The white beam intensified, and within it, shapes began to form. Okonjo took a deep breath, knowing that humanity's first face-to-face encounter with alien life would be completely off-script. May God help us all, he murmured, stepping toward the window as the light reached its crescendo. The moment of truth had arrived, and they weren't ready. Not even close. The beings that emerged from the light didn't walk. They flowed, their crystalline forms shifting like liquid mercury. 3 figures, each nearly 3 meters tall, with geometric patterns swirling beneath their translucent outer layers. They moved with an unsettling grace that made Okanjo's human stride feel clumsy and primitive in comparison. "Distinguished visitors," he began, using the carefully rehearsed greeting that had been crafted by Earth's finest linguists. "On behalf of humanity. Evaluation complete. Status: failed." The words appeared directly in everyone's minds, accompanied by a sensation like ice water running down their spines. The aliens hadn't spoken. They'd simply transmitted the concept of failure into every human brain within a kilometer radius. I don't understand," Okanjo managed, fighting down a wave of nausea from the alien communication. "We haven't even begun the formal introduction protocols." The central figure's geometric patterns pulsed with what might have been irritation. The test began upon initial signal detection. Response: inadequate. Methodology: flawed. Understanding: insufficient. Dr. Hayes's voice crackled through Okanjo's earpiece. "Ambassador, their signal patterns are changing. They're broadcasting globally now. Around the world, every electronic device capable of receiving transmissions activated simultaneously. The alien's message played in every language, in every city, reaching every human mind at once. People of Earth, you have failed the initial contact evaluation. Your species demonstrated insufficient comprehension of basic civilizational standards. The countdown signal contained explicit instructions for proper first contact procedures. Your failure to follow these instructions necessitates immediate quarantine protocols." Okanjo's tablet exploded with notifications as global markets began to crash. In the streets below, panic was already spreading. "Wait," he called out, desperate to salvage the situation. "What instructions?" The signal was a mathematical sequence. The mathematics were the instructions the aliens projected, their patterns now strobing with clear agitation. "Your inability to decode basic fifth-dimensional quantum linguistics proves your species is not ready for integration into the galactic community." In his earpiece, Dr. Hayes was typing furiously. "Jim, they're operating on completely different assumptions about basic communication. They thought their mathematical sequence was as clear as a written manual." The central alien figure raised what might have been an arm. Above the city, the massive ship began to pulse with new energy patterns. "Quarantine protocols will now be initiated. A quantum barrier will be established at the edges of your solar system. No human vessel or transmission will be permitted to pass. This is standard procedure for failed evaluations." Okanjo felt the blood drain from his face. "You're imprisoning us in our own solar system. For how long?" "Until your species evolves sufficient understanding. Estimated time: 50,000 of your years." In the command center behind him, someone let out a choked sob. 50,000 years of isolation, all because they'd failed a test they didn't even know they were taking. But something wasn't right. Dr. Hayes's voice came through again, urgent and excited. "Ambassador, check your tablet. The signal analysis I just sent, there are inconsistencies in their own transmission protocols. Massive ones." Okanjo glanced at his screen, seeing the complex data patterns Kate had highlighted. Even as the aliens began their quarantine procedure, they were making fundamental errors in their own communication standards. Furthermore, the aliens continued, "All memory of this encounter will be—" "Point of order," Okanjo interrupted, surprising himself with his steady voice. "Under whose authority are you implementing these protocols?" The alien's patterns stuttered briefly, a hesitation. "We are representatives of the Concordiat. Our authority is absolute in matters of first contact evaluation. Then I formally request your credentials and operational authorization codes," Okanjo said, reading from the data Kate had sent. "As required by Concordiat Protocol 7 Beta, subsection 12. The alien's patterns froze completely. In his ear, Kate whispered, "Got them. They're panicking. Jim. Their own protocols. They'd violated dozens of them. They never filed a proper evaluation notice. They didn't even log their arrival in the correct quantum frequency. For the first time since they emerged, the aliens turned to each other. Their patterns swirled in what looked remarkably like concern. Humanity had failed their test, but it seemed these aliens had failed their own protocols even more spectacularly. And Ambassador James Okonjo, with Dr. Hayes' help, was about to turn this entire situation on its head. Dr. Catherine Hayes hadn't slept in 36 hours, but her mind was racing faster than ever. The Europa Station's main lab had transformed into a war room, screens displaying data streams from every major observatory in the solar system. She took another sip of her fifth coffee, studying the patterns that everyone else had missed. They're not just breaking their own rules, Dr. Marcus Rodriguez said, his fingers dancing across his specialized interface. The anthropological linguist hadn't looked away from his screen since joining the emergency response team via quantum link. They're terrified of us noticing. How can you tell? Kate asked, watching him work. Marcus's unique way of processing information, what some called his autism, he called his superpower, had already proven invaluable in decoding the aliens' behavioral patterns. Look at their communication frequencies, he replied, pulling up a spectral analysis. Every time Ambassador Okonjo cites another protocol violation, their quantum signatures spike in the same pattern. It's like watching someone's vital signs when they're lying. Kate's tablet chimed. Another message from Sarah. Mom, are the aliens really going to lock us in forever? My science teacher says we should be scared. Her heart ached as she typed back. No, sweetie. We're going to fix this. Promise. She just hoped she could keep that promise. Dr. Hayes. Johnson burst into the lab, tablet in hand. You need to see this. The Chinese just launched 3 missiles at the ship. What? Kate's blood ran cold. Get me Beijing command now. But before she could reach her console, the missiles simply vanished. No explosion, no debris. They ceased to exist the moment they entered the ship's proximity field. Fascinating, Marcus muttered, not looking up. They didn't intercept the missiles. They removed them from our timeline entirely. But look at the energy expenditure. He highlighted a series of readings. That defense took nearly 40% of their ship's power reserves. Kate leaned forward, seeing the pattern emerge. They're not as powerful as they want us to think. Every action costs them. She trailed off, her tired mind making connections. Marcus cross-referenced their energy readings with the original signal pattern. Focus on the error sequences. His fingers flew across the interface. Data streams merged, patterns aligned. And suddenly, oh my God, Kate breathed. They're not a formal evaluation team at all, are they? Marcus shook his head, a rare smile crossing his face. Based on these protocols, they're the equivalent of college interns. They didn't expect us to understand their systems well enough to check their credentials. Kate was already connecting to Shanghai. Ambassador, we got something. Okonjo's voice came through, tense but controlled. Make it quick, Catherine. They're starting to set up the quarantine barrier. They're frauds, she said, not the species. They're really from this Concordia. But this specific team. They're unauthorized. Probably thought they'd found an easy way to make their careers by discovering a failed species. Look at their ship's power readings, Marcus added. They're operating on minimal reserves. A real evaluation vessel would have at least triple the energy signature. And a quarantine threat? Okonjo asked. They can't do it, Kate replied. The energy required to quarantine an entire solar system would be astronomical. They're bluffing, hoping we'll be too scared to challenge them. Through the quantum link, they could hear Okonjo's sharp intake of breath. So when I demanded their credentials, you scared them, Marcus confirmed. Their patterns show increasing stress responses. They're not supposed to be here, and they know they'll be in serious trouble if their superiors find out. Kate pulled up the original signal data one more time. Ambassador, I'm sending you a complete list of every protocol they violated. It's not just procedural errors. They've broken fundamental Concordiate laws about first contact scenarios. How many violations? 273, Marcus answered, including 16 Class 1 infractions that, according to their own legal database, carry severe penalties. Kate allowed herself a small smile. They tried to judge us by standards they themselves couldn't meet. The question is, what do we do with this information? Through the link, they heard Okonjo clear his throat. When he spoke again, his diplomatic tone had been replaced by something harder. We do what humanity does best, doctors. We take their own system and turn it against them. Above Shanghai, the alien ship's patterns began to shift erratically. They were running out of time. But for the first time since this crisis began, Kate felt hope. They weren't helpless. They weren't primitive. They were human, and they were about to show these aliens exactly what that meant. Ambassador Okonjo straightened his tie, a habit that had become almost meditative during diplomatic crises. The aliens' geometric patterns swirled with increasing agitation as he approached their makeshift landing zone, tablet in hand. Your quarantine procedure is hereby suspended, he announced, his voice carrying across the now empty plaza. Under Concordiate Regulation 15 Alpha, I am invoking the right of formal grievance. The aliens' patterns stuttered, a tell that Dr. Rodriguez had identified as their equivalent of nervous swallowing. The central figure pulsed rapidly. You have no authority to invoke Concordiate regulations. Your species has failed evaluation. Interesting, Okonjo replied, pulling up the first document on his tablet. Because according to Concordiate First Contact Protocol 7 Beta, an evaluation can only be conducted by certified senior contact specialists. He paused, letting the words sink in. Would you care to present your certifications? The three aliens' patterns began cycling through colors rapidly. In his earpiece, Marcus whispered, they're trying to communicate with their ship without us noticing. Their encryption is amateur at best. Furthermore, Okonjo continued, his voice growing stronger, I have documented evidence of 273 distinct protocol violations committed by your team during this encounter. Would you like me to enumerate them? This is irrelevant, the rightmost alien projected, but their patterns were becoming increasingly chaotic. The quarantine will. Let's start with Class 1 infractions. Okonjo interrupted, starting to pace like a prosecutor before a jury. Violation 1. Unauthorized acceleration of first contact timeline. Violation 2. Failure to file proper approach vectors with Concordiate space traffic control. Violation 3. Operating a quantum-capable vessel without proper energy reserves. Through his earpiece, Kate's voice was tense with excitement. Their ship's power signature is fluctuating wildly. Whatever you're doing, it's working. Violation 4. Okonjo pressed on, watching the aliens' patterns become increasingly erratic, attempting to implement quarantine procedures without central authority approval. Violation 5. Conducting an evaluation without proper linguistic baseline establishment. Enough. The central alien's projection was so strong it made everyone within 100 meters wince. You cannot possibly understand. Oh, but we do understand. Okonjo cut in smoothly. Dr. Rodriguez, would you care to explain what we understand? Marcus's voice came through the plaza's speaker system, calm and precise. Your quantum signatures match those of probationary evaluation officers. Based on your energy usage patterns and protocol knowledge gaps, this is likely your first solo assignment. You expected to find a primitive species you could easily classify as a failure, thereby fast-tracking your careers. Instead, you found us. The aliens' patterns had almost completely frozen, the equivalent, Kate had theorized, of breaking out in a cold sweat. Here's what's going to happen, Okonjo said, his voice deadly quiet. I am sending this documentation to every Concordiate communication frequency we've detected. Your superiors will receive a full report of your unauthorized actions within the next 30 seconds. You wouldn't, the leftmost alien projected weakly. The quarantine. The quarantine that would require 12 times your ship's maximum power output to implement. Okonjo raised an eyebrow. That quarantine. In his ear, Kate's voice was triumphant. Transmission complete. And, oh, Ambassador, you're going to want to see this. We're picking up multiple quantum signatures entering the system. Big ones. It seems, Okonjo said, allowing himself a small smile, that your supervisors would like a word. The three aliens' patterns had contracted to almost nothing, making them look somehow smaller. Their projected thoughts, when they came, carried the unmistakable tone of defeat. Please, the central figure transmitted. We were only trying to. Save your explanations for your superiors, Okonjo interrupted. I'm sure they'll be very interested in hearing how you managed to violate nearly every protocol in the handbook while attempting to condemn an entire species to isolation. Above them, the sky rippled again. But this time, the distortions were larger, more controlled, more professional. The young aliens' patterns contracted further as three massive ships, each one dwarfing their vessel, appeared in perfect formation. Humanity's real first contact was about to begin. And this time, they weren't the ones who had failed the test. The new arrivals were nothing like the first ship. Where the junior officer's vessel had been chaotic and flashy, these ships were masterpieces of geometric precision. They hung in the air with absolute stillness, their crystalline structures arranged in patterns so perfect they seemed to define space itself rather than exist within it. Catherine, Okonjo whispered into his comm, please tell me you're seeing this. Seeing and analyzing, she replied, her voice filled with professional awe. Their energy signatures are. I don't even have numbers for this. Marcus, are you getting these readings? More than readings, Marcus responded. They're broadcasting on all frequencies. But it's not just communication. They're rewriting local quantum fields, creating their own space-time bubble. This is what real Concordia technology looks like. A beam of pure crystalline light shot down from the central ship, but unlike the crude display from earlier, this one seemed to fold space itself. Where it touched the ground, reality rippled outward in perfect concentric circles. The junior officer's patterns had contracted to nearly nothing, making them look like frightened children. Which, Okonjo realized, they essentially were. From the light emerged a single figure. Unlike the geometric shapes of the junior officers, this being's form seemed to shift between states of matter, solid, liquid, gas, and something else entirely. Its patterns moved with deliberate grace, each shift meaningful and precise. Ambassador Okonjo, the being projected, its thoughts crystal clear and somehow warm, unlike the crude mental broadcasts of the juniors. I am Senior Evaluator X2991. We have received your most interesting complaint. Okonjo bowed slightly, remembering Dr. Rodriguez's hasty coaching about Concordiate formalities. Senior Evaluator, we appreciate your prompt response to our concerns. Prompt. The being's patterns shifted in what might have been amusement. Ambassador, your species managed to decode our bureaucratic systems, identify multiple protocol violations, and file a formal complaint through quantum channels you shouldn't even be able to access. All within 6 hours of first contact. Prompt was the only possible response. In his ear, Kate was rapidly analyzing data. Jim, their energy patterns. They're not just impressed. They're fascinated. The senior evaluator turned to the junior officers, whose patterns had begun to vibrate with what could only be terror. As for you three, Senior Evaluator, Okonjo interrupted, surprising himself. If I may. The being's patterns shifted questioningly. You wish to speak in their defense? Not exactly. Okonjo glanced at his tablet, where Kate had just sent new data. Rather, I'd like to propose that their actions, while grossly inappropriate, have inadvertently revealed critical flaws in the Concordiate's evaluation systems. Marcus's voice came through, rapid and excited. The patterns, Ambassador. Show them the patterns. Okonjo held up his tablet, displaying the complex analysis that Kate and Marcus had compiled. Their violations exposed assumptions built into your protocols, assumptions that might be causing you to overlook promising species simply because they process information differently than you do. The senior evaluator moved closer, its patterns shifting to what Marcus had identified as deep focus. Explain. Your junior officers failed to follow proper procedures, yes, but in doing so, they created a situation that tested our species in ways your standard protocols never would have. We demonstrated capabilities that your normal evaluation process might have missed entirely. In his ear, Kate whispered, "The other ships are scanning us. All of Earth. They're processing everything. All of human history, culture, technology." The senior evaluator's patterns had become increasingly complex. You are suggesting that the very failures of our junior officers have revealed failures in our entire evaluation system. I'm suggesting, Okonjo said carefully, that sometimes the most valuable data comes from when systems break down. Your officers' mistakes revealed both humanity's capabilities and the Concordia's blind spots. The being was silent for a long moment, its patterns shifting through configurations that neither Kate nor Marcus could interpret. Finally, it turned to the junior officers. Your unauthorized actions and protocol violations will be addressed, it projected. But first, it turned back to Okonjo. Ambassador, I believe humanity has just volunteered to help us revise our entire first contact methodology. Unless I'm mistaken. Okonjo smiled. Senior evaluator, nothing would please us more. Above them, the quantum fields began to shift again. But this time, they weren't heralding an ending. They were marking a beginning. You realize, Dr. Catherine Hayes said, watching the quantum fields ripple above Shanghai through Europa's enhanced telescopes, that we basically just offered to help rewrite the galaxy's rulebook. Correction, Marcus replied through the quantum link, his voice carrying an unusual hint of humor. We didn't just offer. They're already implementing our suggestions. The massive holographic displays filling Shanghai's plaza showed the extent of the changes. The senior evaluator had converted the entire area into what they called a consensus space, a quantum-enhanced environment where ideas could be shared and tested in real time. Okonjo stood in the center of it all, surrounded by swirling data streams that made the junior officers' displays look like child's drawings. Dr. Hayes, are you seeing these evaluation histories? Unfortunately, Kate replied, her voice tight. According to these records, the Concordia has classified 67 species as failures in the past century alone, all because they didn't respond to first contact in the expected way. The senior evaluator's patterns shifted in what they'd learned to recognize as deep concern. Your species has revealed a significant bias in our methodology. We assumed that any intelligent species would naturally interpret our mathematical signals the same way we do. That's like expecting a fish to understand architecture, Marcus interjected, his fingers flying across his interface. Different evolutionary paths lead to different types of intelligence. Look at human neurodiversity. Even within our own species, we process information in radically different ways. The senior evaluator turned to the junior officers who had been standing silently throughout the analysis. Your unauthorized evaluation, while grossly improper, has inadvertently exposed critical flaws in our entire first contact protocol. Your punishment will reflect this complexity. The junior officer's patterns flickered with what might have been hope. Instead of immediate dismissal, the senior evaluator continued, you will assist in implementing the new protocols that humanity is helping us design. Consider it a lesson in the importance of understanding different perspectives. Kate's screen suddenly lit up with new data. Ambassador, they're releasing their quarantine records. Hundreds of species, isolated across the galaxy, all because they failed evaluations that were fundamentally flawed. Not just flawed, Marcus added, his voice growing excited. Look at the pattern correlations. The more unique or different a species' way of thinking, the more likely they were to fail. The Concordiate wasn't just testing for intelligence. They were unconsciously testing for similarity to themselves. The senior evaluator's patterns shifted in what they now recognized as profound realization. We have been limiting the galaxy's diversity in the name of maintaining standards. This must be corrected. Okonjo stepped forward, his diplomatic training giving way to genuine passion. We can help with that. Humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology or our mathematics. It's our ability to adapt, to see things differently, to question assumptions. Yes, the senior evaluator agreed. Its patterns becoming more complex. Your species failed our test spectacularly, and in doing so, proved that the test itself was inadequate. Instead of following our protocols, you analyzed them. Instead of accepting our judgment, you examined our authority. Instead of submitting to quarantine, you found flaws in our system. Kate smiled, watching the data streams shift and reform. We didn't just fail their test, did we? We broke it completely. And in breaking it, Marcus added, we proved it needed to be broken. The senior evaluator raised what might have been an appendage, and the quantum fields above Shanghai began to pulse with new energy. The Concordiate hereby formally recognizes humanity not as a failed species, but as a valuable partner in reforming our evaluation protocols. The junior officer's patterns shifted in what could only be confusion. One of them projected hesitantly, but they didn't follow any of the proper procedures. No, the senior evaluator agreed. Its patterns showing what they'd learned to recognize as satisfaction. They did something far more important. They showed us our own blind spots. Sometimes, young ones, the greatest test is not whether others can follow our rules, but whether our rules are worth following. Above them, the quantum fields began to stabilize into new configurations. The real work was about to begin. Humanity hadn't just passed their test. They'd rewritten it entirely. 3 months later, Dr. Catherine Hayes stood in the newly constructed Concordiate Liaison Center in Geneva, watching her daughter Sarah press her hands against the quantum display window. The view shifted between different alien worlds, each home to a species that had once been deemed a failure. Mom, look at that one. Sarah pointed to a world where crystalline beings communicated through light patterns. They think in colors. Actually, Marcus said, approaching with his tablet, they think in quantum chromatic frequencies. Colors are just how our brains interpret it. He smiled at Sarah, more comfortable with children than adults. They asked better questions. The door shimmered, and Ambassador Okonjo entered with the senior evaluator. Their patterns now familiar enough that Kate could read their satisfaction. The last quarantine barrier was lifted this morning, Okonjo announced. All 67 species are being reintegrated into galactic society, and humanity's new evaluation framework is already showing remarkable results. The senior evaluator's patterns shifted in what they'd learned was joy. 3 species that would have failed our old protocols have been successfully contacted using your methods. As it turns out, searching for different types of intelligence yields far better results than searching for reflections of ourselves. Kate watched as the junior officers, now part of the new First Contact Training Division, led a group of human diplomats through basic quantum communication exercises. Their patterns no longer showed fear or arrogance, but a genuine eagerness to learn and teach. The Delta Protocol incident, Marcus read from his tablet, will be taught as a turning point in galactic history. The day we learn that true intelligence isn't about following rules, it's about knowing when to break them. Sarah tugged at Kate's sleeve. Mom, does this mean I can be an alien diplomat when I grow up? Kate laughed, remembering her own broken promise about a birthday video call that seemed like a lifetime ago. Sweetie, you can be anything you want. That's kind of the whole point. Through the quantum window, they could see ships departing Earth's atmosphere, human vessels modified with Concordiate technology, carrying teams of diplomats and scientists to meet newly contacted species. Each team was diverse, chosen not just for their expertise, but for their different ways of thinking and processing information. You know what the best part is? Okanjo said, watching the ships climb higher. We didn't just change their protocols. They changed us too. Humanity's learning to look beyond our own assumptions, to see intelligence and worth in forms we never imagined. The senior evaluator's patterns rippled with agreement. The truest test of any civilization isn't how well they follow rules, but how they handle when those rules fail. Your species not only survived our junior officer's mistakes, you turned those mistakes into opportunities for growth. For everyone. Kate felt Sarah's hand slip into hers as they watched another ship break atmosphere. What do you see out there, sweetie? Sarah pressed her other hand against the quantum glass, her eyes wide with wonder. I see everything, Mom. All the different ways of thinking and being and existing. It's like the biggest science experiment ever. Marcus nodded approvingly. She gets it. That's exactly what it is. The junior officer's approach, their patterns showing what humans now recognize as eagerness to learn. One projected hesitantly, "We still don't understand how you knew to challenge our protocols." "We didn't," Kate replied, squeezing her daughter's hand. "We just did what humans do. We asked questions, we looked for patterns, and we refused to accept that different meant wrong." Above them, the quantum fields shimmered with the constant traffic of ships arriving and departing. Humanity had taken its first steps into a larger universe, not as junior members of galactic society, but as teachers and students both. They had failed the Concordiate's test spectacularly. And in doing so, they had passed a far more important one, proving that sometimes the greatest discoveries come not from following the rules, but from having the courage to question them. Sarah looked up at the stars, now filled with possibilities instead of barriers. "Mom, what's next?" Kate smiled, watching humanity's future unfold above them. "Everything, sweetie. Everything is next."